time. I call the honourable member for Forrest.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it's interesting when I listen to the members on the other side talking a lot about regional Australia. Well, it will be regional Australia that will bear the cost and is bearing the cost already. I see the member in front of me right here, and the impact that wind turbines are having in her electorate and the disregard in total for her community as a result, and for the local environment in that approach. Because this is all about Labor's renewables-only policy. And when I looked at the legislation, I just see, again, there's a dismissive approach. But when we see another big Canberra-centric, another bureaucracy going to dictate yet again to regional Australia what we should and shouldn't have and how it should work. We have unique needs in the regions, but I don't expect those, and I know from experience, many years' experience in this place, I don't actually expect that those who will be part of this authority actually live, work, breathe and exist like we do in the regions and understand it well enough to make sound decisions. You know, I understand that it's a very narrow approach that Labor's taking here, this shopfront for industry and investment around the redeployment of workers as the coal-fired power stations and also their dependent employees are affected. I'll be particularly interested to see who is actually appointed to this authority and how many of those members will actually come from regional Australia that are on the authority itself that will be making the decisions. How many will there be with small, medium and large business experience, small business in particular, because that's what we have a lot of in the regions, the ones that will be directly affected by Labor's renewables-only energy policies. But there'll be interesting discussions around what actual jobs will those workers be able to actually transition to. But how will Labor and the Labor government, through this authority, mitigate the impact that this is and will increasingly have in regional areas and communities? Even in mine, with 7,000 square kilometres of offshore wind proposed, a little like the member sitting at the table, same sort of issues in our patch. The regions carry all the cost of this, and they're dictated by those who are city-based. There is a lack of clarity and detail in what I've read in this particular bill and how many of the businesses will be affected. This is actually just another boondoggle jobs for mates at taxpayers' expense. It was originally supposed to cost $189.3 million, but I see the latest budget shows that that $189.3 million isn't nearly enough for this latest bureaucracy. So the latest budget upped the ante, doubling the budget to nearly over $400 million, with a further out to $1.1 billion that this is going to cost in the medium term. $1.1 billion. So that's on top of Labor's extra 36,000 extra public servants in the budget, at a cost of $24 billion over the forward estimates. But when we actually see the membership of the Net Zero Authority, so we look at the numbers that are there, I'll be very interested to see who's actually a member, and those that are not just from unions but from actual business and from the regions themselves. And we do know that this was another payoff to the union, a long-held union wish list item that the government is delivering. But what we absolutely will see that this is, as I said, the next jobs for mates and a massive bureaucratic waste and duplication with that top-down Canberra-centric approach. And it does sideline the very useful Regional Development Australia committees that I work very closely with in my role as the Assistant Ministers. So I just wonder how the authority will deal with the impact of those 28,000 kilometres of additional transmission lines Labor has said that are needed, and how is that going to impact on farmers and food producers that are affected? Or will the new and improved Net Zero Authority simply facilitate the steamrolling of our farmers and food producers who currently own and work the land and produce critical food for this nation and others? How will the authority deal with the impact of the thousands of hectares that Labor plans to be covered by solar panels, what it does and will do to the soils underneath over the years, And who will be responsible for rehabilitating and restoring the soil health at the end of life of the solar factories? And of course, who will pay? Will this be part of the Net Zero Authority role? And I can't find exactly how the over $1 billion cost to taxpayers will actually guarantee and result in lower energy bills for taxpayers, businesses and industry, and exactly what those jobs will be for those who lose their businesses or livelihoods because of Labor's approach. Where are the guarantees for local workers that jobs will actually exist in their areas, in their regions, where they probably already are paying off a house and living and their kids go to school? Jobs that they're actually trained or retrained to work in. Details of what those jobs actually will be and the smaller businesses that will be affected by this transition that Labor is engaged in. So many of these businesses actually don't know that that's not all that's going to hit them once Labor's new industrial relations policy start in August. I suspect that the unions may keep a lower profile until after the election, but I hope businesses are actually ready for more union control and interference in their businesses. And this new authority adds yet another layer of regulation overlapping existing industrial relations obligations for businesses. So I just don't know what's going to happen to the smaller dependent employers noted in the explanatory memorandum. What liability or issues will cleaning services or subcontractors, those involved in providing currently goods and services to those businesses and industries that are going to be shut down? I'm just not sure where the people are going to come from for the smaller businesses to do the administration required, not just the people, but how will a small business pay for them? I mean, and that along with having to report constantly on Scope 3 emissions. That tells you that the Labor government doesn't understand small businesses at all. The ones that don't have IR or HR capacity in their business, they actually work all day and do all their accounts and their business management at night. They can't afford to employ people to do this work, but that's what's going to be expected. And we already know this comes at a time where we've had an extra 16,000 business insolvencies since July of 2022. This layer upon layer upon layer for small business and medium business is exactly what this government is doing to them. And, Labor can't keep taking for granted small business people, those that actually invest, medium and larger businesses and investors, those who actually take the risk and have a go, who are prepared to invest and start and run a business. Unless they do so, there are or will be no jobs for our workers, perhaps unless you're one of the new Canberra bureaucrats. 36,000 of them will get more jobs. But this bill is a further waste of taxpayers' money that does duplicate existing state-based mechanisms. And we are seeing that it's part of the additional $315 billion of Labor's homegrown inflation that is hurting Australians. Inflation that's worse than the US, Singapore, Germany, Spain, Japan, Canada and many other countries. So we also know that after 2 years of Labor, a typical family with a mortgage is more than $35,000 worse off. And I've said that this new authority, at a cost of $1.1 billion to the taxpayer over the medium term and $400 million over the next few years. What does it buy? Well, a rebranded agency and highly paid jobs for Labor's mates. The 8 board positions, 2 from unions, 2 from business and 4 other positions at the discretion of the authority. Won't that be an interesting decision that will be made? But there's also issues here that I think Labor hasn't addressed, because this is just another bureaucracy having to be paid for by taxpayers. But I actually have a question for Labor. The government is providing support for workers whose jobs are disappearing because of Labor's policy decisions. But there are other Labor policy decisions where jobs and productivity is disappearing. So I just wonder, where is the live sheep export industry statutory authority? I didn't see that in the budget. Where's the same level of support for those who will lose their jobs and livelihoods with Labor's shutdown of the live sheep exports. If this is all about jobs in regions, you know, this industry, the live sheep export industry, is a $1.3 billion industry. But Labor's only committed $105 million over 5 years to the transition and only $64.6 million for sheep producers. So that doesn't really come close to the $1.1 billion that Labor is proposing for this new net zero economy authority, just to do some work, apparently. It's got nothing to do with the lives of the people affected. And apparently, I just wonder, why isn't the same level of support not provided to sheep producers and their communities? They're massively affected, but very little provided for them. How are they? Apparently this is to benefit the regions in maintaining their social cohesion, employment and identity. What about those regions that are affected, particularly in Western Australia, by the live sheep export trade shutdown? What about the live sheep trade producers and their communities? Don't they deserve the same as the massive change that Labor is proposing through its renewables-only policies? Well, they actually do. They actually do. There are 3,000 people and jobs affected in that industry. But of course, unfortunately, farmers and regional people actually don't matter to this Labor government. And the Labor has actually turned its back repeatedly on farmers and regional and remote communities. And we've seen some real contempt, unfortunately, by the government. I know they had a real crack at introducing a biosecurity tax on farmers, another levy on farmers themselves. They're already paying $500 million a year in levies, various ag levies, and yet the government wanted them to pay another $50 million a year simply for the biosecurity risk created by their competitors coming on shore. So as each of the containers came into Australia, Labor wanted the actual farmers to pay for that. And I know that last week, about a few weeks before the minister announced the shutdown for the live sheep export industry, 5 Labor MPs in WA recommended in a discussion paper that the WA government should provide more support for an alternative protein such as insects, algae and tofu. Well, how good is that? And this is a really serious issue in Western Australia, but I see such a contrast in what Labor is planning to do in supporting their own policy in relation to shutting down industries in regional Australia in the coal and resources sector and in energy. However, a completely opposite approach to supporting those that are going to be just as affected, the communities just in the same way affected, compares 64 odd million and 100 million in total for the live sheep. And yet, what have we got? 1.1 billion for what Labor's proposing in their renewables-only approach to this particular piece of legislation and their plans. This is a serious concern of just another major Canberra bureaucracy, extraordinary cost to taxpayers, and a real challenge. I think Labor is ignoring the massive impost that it is making with its policies on regional and more remote parts of Australia. Thank you.